I'm writing this because I, 23F, will be turning 24 on the 10th of February this month. My trafficker was 24 years old when I met him at the age of 17 in high school. I've always wanted to tell my story, but I've been controlled by fear that he'll find out and try to do something. But this is a safe place for it, being anonymous. I had just gotten out of my first ever relationship where I was in love with a boy who mentally and physically started abusing me the second year we were together. I stayed with him every time he cheated on me because he always blamed me as the reason he did. I didn't love myself, so I tolerated a lot. We had a messy breakup, and I felt like I couldn't live without him. My codependency was so bad, so I resorted to downloading Tinder to find someone to fill the void. I came across a 24-year-old man who was a music producer. I thought it was perfect because I am a singer-songwriter, and I thought it'd be cool to work with him. We immediately hit it off, and he started picking me up from school, and we'd head to his homeboy's house, who had the studio in it. I was in a bad place mentally, so I confided in him all the time about how I felt and how sad I was from my breakup. He comforted me and eventually, after 2 weeks, told me he loved me and wanted to be my boyfriend. Of course, that was music to my ears because I was so deprived of validation growing up. It felt good to be wanted for once. Everything was so much fun when we first met. He was so funny and charming and made me feel special for my musical talents and personality. He introduced me to his friends. I'll give them fake names for safety. There was his homeboy Montrell, 25, and his girlfriend's name was Chelsea, 23. They were super cool and kind to me when I met them, and they were always engaging with me and getting to know me. I had turned 18, and that's when things took a turn. My boyfriend would take me over to their house almost every day after school, and we'd work on music, but I remember eating with all of them, and Chelsea started to ask me questions about what I wanted to do after I graduated. She would ask questions about my at-home life, and was just trying to seem like she was getting to know me. One day in particular, I had gone back over there, and my boyfriend told me to go sit in the studio and to talk with Chelsea and one of her friends that was over that day. I had sat on a couch, and the two girls sat in chairs across from me, and my boyfriend and Montrell were outside the room, only separated by a little room divider screen. They had started by asking me what I wanted to do again outside of high school, and I mentioned that I'd like to do music, possibly. They both lit up with happiness at that answer and said, yeah, I think you definitely should, and then proceeded to ask me how I thought they got all the studio equipment and a house by their age. I told them I had no idea. And Chelsea followed by saying, well, what we do is called escorting and your boyfriend and mine are pimps. I laughed because I had no idea what an actual pimp was. I thought it just meant being cool or a poser, lol. I remember laughing, and then the room got really intense and serious, and I felt really uncomfortable around this time. They continued to go into detail about what it looked like. All they said was they'd just go out on dates with old, lonely men who just want someone to talk to. And I said, doesn't your boyfriend get jealous, or is he okay with it? And that's when both the boys entered the room and started glamorizing the entire thing. They said how everyone's doing it now and no one wants to work a 9 to 5, and I shouldn't want to either. They said how all the money I could make could also go towards my music career. They just talked about it for what seemed forever, and the whole time I could tell they were reading me super deep. They made it seem so lighthearted and to just think about it, just think about trying it. I made it obvious I was weirded out by it, and then they said they occasionally had to have sex with the person to keep them around, and that's when I started laughing and saying, you an old man? And they didn't laugh. My gut sank. My boyfriend took me home that night and just told me to maybe think about it. I told all of them I didn't want it because it sounded weird, but when he dropped me off, I told him I'd think about it because it was being pressed so much. The next day, he picked me up from school and started driving downtown to Houston, and I thought me and him were going to do something fun. He stopped at a restaurant and told me that he had set up a date with someone, and all I had to do is talk to him and get the money from under the table. I told him there was no way in hell I was about to do that. I was so nervous I was going to mess up or embarrass myself. I wasn't comfortable at all, and I was scared. He told me if I didn't like it, I'd never have to do it again. That was a lie. I did it, and that was only the beginning. He had dates arranged back to back for the next day, and the next day. I told him I didn't want to do it, but that's when Chelsea, Montrell, and him would take me on a drive to Bissonnette Street and tell me how their way is the better way, the classier way. They would glamorize it and hype it up to be this empowering thing. They said if I don't do it this way, then I'll have to walk the blade. It was so much intimidation, and they always made it seem like I had a choice to get out of it. They would always make me verbally confirm that I wanted to do it throughout these meetings. I'm sure they were secretly recording my confirmation of me saying I agreed to it at these times, just in case they got caught up. I only agreed to it because when I would say no, they wouldn't stop the coercion until I agreed, and it genuinely felt like no wasn't an answer. It progressed very, very fast. I didn't process everything until I was 20 years old. I was told I had to start sleeping with these men in order to keep them. I questioned them if this was prostitution, but they insisted that it wasn't at all. My boyfriend made me a fake ID of me and bought me flavored condoms, a taser, and a burner phone for my purse. One time, I refused to go sleep with one. Me and my mom were in a brutal argument, and I had nowhere to stay. I was sleeping on a park bench near my house. I had just gotten my tonsils removed, and I was on pain meds to help me heal. I was so tired and exhausted, and he told me he'd come pick me up and take care of me. We were driving in his car when he told me I had to work. I screamed and cried because I was just so tired and loopy and hadn't showered or eaten, and he pushed me outside the passenger door off the highway and dragged me by the door and tried to take off. I begged and screamed at him to not leave me, and he said I had to work then. So I did. I received $400, and he spent $20 of the money to get me the shittiest, roach-infested hotel he could find for me to sleep in. Just $20. I was never allowed to keep any of the money. It all went to him and his bills. He had met my mom and lied about his age and made fake business cards and handed them to her to make her think I was working at music venues at night in downtown Houston, and that's why I was never home. My mom never assumed anything because she was very neglectful of me growing up. I would just cry to her over the phone about how my boyfriend and I got into an argument, but she had no idea what all was happening. I had no idea what was happening. I just did what he said, and I resisted so many times and would be left with barely any clothes on in the cold with no phone in the River Oaks neighborhood and other parts of Houston. Chelsea would have one-on-ones with me at hotels, trying to bond with me and get the tea on why I didn't want to work. She would tell me I just gotta do more work to make more money and have girl talks with me to get me to just boss up. I trusted her more than the others, but I think that was the plan. She would open up to me about her abusive ex and how she used to be an alcoholic and how Montreal saved her and made her better. One time, they took me and her to Louisiana during that food fest back in 2018. There were thousands of people, and my boyfriend and Montreal were scouting, looking for girls to pimp. I was with Chelsea most of the night, and Montreal had told her not to drink. I don't know why, but I told her she should let loose and drink because she was thinking about doing it. I had completely forgotten she used to be an alcoholic. Montreal found out and yelled at her so badly in her face, and all she had was this dissociated stare, almost like she was about to laugh. He was in her face screaming and causing the biggest scene and calling her a stupid bitch. My heart broke for her, and I felt like it was all my fault. This all went on for a couple of months and continued after I graduated. My boyfriend was demanding more from me and was frustrated by my lack of work ethic. He had started to ask me to bring $200 just to hug him if I wanted affection. I just wanted him to love me. I was so scared to be left again and to feel like something's wrong with me, to not be lovable, and he ate that up. I'd be left at gas stations, highways, parking lots, and rich neighborhoods and hotels if I didn't comply. But my biggest fear was being left by him. How I got out? I still have no idea in hell how. I had a church camp I grew up going to over the summer. I couldn't afford it this year because the church usually would pay for it, but this year they couldn't. I had gotten a call from my stepdad's sister all the way in West Virginia, and she told me she heard about my church camp and had paid for me to go already. I was able to convince my trafficker to let me go. I told him I would make twice the money when I come back. He told me no at first, but then changed his mind. The church camp was in Florida, so it was a long bus ride there. And on that ride, he disposed of me like human trash. He had texted me that he had come up with a brand new idea and vision to make money, and it didn't include me. I asked him what it was, and he didn't want to tell me because it's too good for me to know. I begged and sobbed the hardest I ever have for him to stay with me, and he insisted it's not going to work out anymore. And I went home after that week away, and I had no idea what all happened to me until 2020, when a friend from church showed me Christina Rangel's podcast about her trafficking story. My heart stopped with how similar it was to mine. I had told absolutely no one about what happened to me because I was still so confused about what all happened. I reached out to her and ended up getting involved with law enforcement and opened a case that lasted a couple of months. They couldn't collect enough evidence that it had happened or is still happening. And he's still out here today with his kids and baby mother he still lives with, and they're all just living their best lives, probably doing this to other little girls. There are still so many graphic details I purposely didn't touch on, but I say this story now because I am 24 years old, and the investigators were right, it was way beyond me. It doesn't matter that I had a rough childhood or was desperate for someone to love me. They could have done this to anyone. This was way beyond my power at the time. Most trafficking is done by someone you trust, and it rarely looks like being abducted by a van, although it can. The most common way is through grooming and coercion, and I hope one day they get caught up. He has 3 little kids, and I pray he doesn't do this to them or anyone else again.